The weather in the UK is about to turn colder, but before it turns colder, in some places it's going to get even wetter. The rain and the change to colder weather are both connected, not only to each other, but to the atmospheric circulation close to the UK and thousands of miles from the UK. I'm going to explain how all of these pieces fit together in this week's Met Office Deep Dive. Welcome along. Thank you for joining me. We do these every Tuesday for our YouTube channel and a couple of other places. And if you enjoy them, please do tell us about it. Send us a comment, hit like, hit subscribe, tell your friends about it, spread the love. But lots to cover in this week's Deep Dive, so I'm going to crack straight on with it. We're starting with the radar there. This is Tuesday morning. Spells of rain are spreading across the UK. The rain has been a talking point and it will continue to be the talking point during the next few days. But the temperatures have also been a talking point. We're going to talk about how it's going to turn colder in a moment, but let's first mention how exceptionally mild it has been this November so far. Take a look at this. This is the accumulated temperature, so the mean temperature for November 2025 so far. Here's the current line, and it is way above the red line, which is the highest on record for the time of year. That was set in 2015. These kinds of records, where you look specifically at the day of the month, well, these go back to the 1930s. Our monthly seasonal temperature records go back to 1884, but these particular records, where we can look at the finer details day to day, they go back to the 1930s. So it has, at the time of recording, first 10 days, been the warmest in that particular record for the mean temperature. That's the average of the maximum and the minimum temperature, but the maximum and minimum temperature have both been way above average. The minimum temperature, warmest on record, maximum temperature, the daytime highs, one of the warmest on record. There's the average, so we should be just under 8 Celsius. Instead, it's been closer to 11 Celsius, just a little below, 4.3 degrees above average for November. Of course, you'd expect the first half of November to be a little warmer than the November average as a whole, because it gets colder as you approach winter, but not that much warmer. The first 10 days have been more like the kinds of temperatures you'd expect in the first part of October. Not only that, but it's been a wet November so far as well. I know I'm probably stating the obvious here. Everyone is fully aware of how warm and how wet it has been. And it's going to continue to be warm and wet for several more days in some parts of the UK, not everywhere. It's going to turn colder, starting off in the north, and then eventually that colder air will spread further south. To explain what's going on, what's causing the heavy rain, and what's causing that transition to colder air, let's take a look at the bigger picture. Now, this shows the Atlantic and Europe, the jet stream, the synoptic picture, that's what we call it, the lows and highs and so on. So far this November, we've had what we call a very zonal jet stream. That means it's been relatively flat across the Atlantic and it's been firing areas of low pressure towards the UK. So we've had spells of rain, a lot of cloud, and west to southwesterly winds. And in some ways, it remains the case that we've got the jet stream pointing towards the UK, sending us further low pressure systems and weather fronts. But there are going to be some significant changes in that jet stream over the next few days. And the cause of those changes, well, that's down to a number of things that are all coming together, remarkably so. They're all coming together in the same way. Now, we often talk about teleconnections in the Met Office 10-day trend. 10-day trend, yes, and the deep dive. And these teleconnections, that's where the weather, the atmospheric circulation, or the sea temperatures in other parts of the globe can have a ripple effect on the UK's weather, most notably on the shape and the intensity of the jet stream, and that of course controls whether we get low pressure and high and so on. Now, teleconnections such as El Nino stroke La Nina, the Indian Ocean dipole, the stratospheric polar vortex, the Madden-Julian oscillation. We've got videos on all of these, so I'm not going to go into detail on what they are and how they affect the UK's weather. If you're interested, we do have videos on our YouTube channels, check them out. But suffice to say, at the moment, there is La Nina in the Pacific. We've got the Madden-Julian Oscillation in phase 6. That's where you get this enhancement of tropical rainfall close to Indonesia around the West Pacific area. We've got the Indian Ocean dipole in a negative phase rather than a positive phase. And we've got the quasi-biennial oscillation in an easterly phase. Now, all of those things tend to promote more blocking in the Atlantic, that is, high pressure building in the North Atlantic, and a weaker, more wobbly jet stream. And they're all coming together. So at the moment, with La Nina in place, that does mean that the West Pacific, it has above average temperatures, and you get more rainfall over Indonesia. With the Indian Ocean dipole in a negative phase, that roughly means the same thing. Indonesia, warmer and wetter, so big thunderstorms over Indonesia. The phase 6, the Madden-Julian Oscillation, as I mentioned, more thunderstorms over Indonesia. And then the quasi-biennial oscillation, that's the wind in the stratosphere way above the equator. When that's in an easterly phase, when it's moving around the planet in an easterly direction, that can have a drag effect on the jet stream. And so when you've got the enhanced thundery activity over Indonesia, that can send pulses of energy throughout the atmosphere, buckling the jet stream. All of these factors, for once, sometimes they work against each other, but for once they're all pointing in the same direction. And that is a weaker, more wavy jet stream, higher pressure over the North Atlantic in the next week to 10 days. And that is indeed what we're going to see play out. Now, this is the jet stream at the moment. It's got some wobbliness to it, but watch how wavy it gets. Into Wednesday, you can see this branch pushing way north over Greenland as high pressure builds over Greenland and Iceland. And then we've got this dip to the south of the UK. And by Thursday, it's really quite amplified over the North Atlantic. And we're heading towards what we call a negative North Atlantic Oscillation. What does that mean? Well, the North Atlantic Oscillation is essentially the difference between the pressure over Iceland and the pressure over the Azores. On average, you get higher pressure over the Azores than over Iceland. That promotes a westerly, on average, wind coming in from the Atlantic. It's what we've seen through the first part of November. But when you get lower than average pressure over the Azores and higher pressure than you'd normally expect over Iceland, well, that leads to what we call a negative North Atlantic Oscillation, and it tends to weaken that westerly influence. It doesn't always get rid of the westerlies, but it can weaken it so much that you get easterlies or northerlies over the UK. You also get a more amplified jet stream. Now, often this is simplified to the extent that people might say that a negative North Atlantic Oscillation, late autumn into winter, leads to colder and drier weather for the UK. And that is often the case, but it's not always the case. In fact, it's going to be far from that case for some parts of the UK over the next few days. We're going into a negative North Atlantic Oscillation. We're going into a period in which we've got lower pressure towards the southwest of the UK, higher pressure towards the northwest of the UK, a wobbly jet stream, more of an easterly wind, but at the same time, some parts of the UK are still going to be exceptionally mild and some parts of the UK are going to be exceptionally wet. The reason is that low pressure towards the Azores is close enough over the next few days, for the rest of this week, to continue to send pulses of rain towards the UK from the south and southwest. And with those south and southwesterly winds, of course, it's going to stay very mild, temperatures of 16, 17 Celsius across southern parts of the UK. Meanwhile, the colder, drier weather is starting to make inroads, but only into the north of the UK. And you can see that by Thursday, that's the day in which the colder air starts to dig into Scotland. And it remains mostly across Scotland for the rest of this week. But it becomes increasingly cold across Scotland, whilst it becomes increasingly mild across the south of the UK. And this contrast, this thermal contrast, this difference between the cold and the mild, actually helps to pep up the rain, the weather fronts that mark the boundary between the cold air in the north and the mild air further south. And it's on that boundary that will oscillate across the UK during the next few days. It's going to come up from the south, push back, and then come back up again at various times. It's going to wave across central and southern parts of the UK. But along that boundary, a couple of things happen. The weather fronts become more active, so heavier rain, but also the isobars tighten up. And Friday in particular, very heavy rain, which I'll talk more about in a moment, but also tighter isobars, so particularly strong winds developing, and those winds coming from the east. Less of a common direction for strong winds in the UK, and as a result could cause some issues. Also, the heaviest rain affecting eastern parts of the UK, or at least east-facing hills across parts of Wales and the Pennines, for example. Again, less of a common thing to happen in the UK. So, yes, we're going into this phase where we've got a negative North Atlantic Oscillation. That's being caused by a lot of different things occurring at the same time around the globe. It eventually is likely to make the UK's weather colder and drier next week, perhaps. But in the interim period, it's actually causing some parts of the UK to become warmer and wetter for a bit. If we had westerlies, these fronts would move through quickly. You'd have spells of rain like we've had through November so far. But as it is, these fronts get stuck. They stall. They become heavier, but they also stall. So they're going to become slow moving. And so that's why we're expecting some issues from rainfall over the next few days. Let's take a look at the rainfall first of all, before we get on to the temperatures. This sums it up. 24-hour totals each day of the working week. Now, initially, Tuesday, you can see the highest totals, a couple of brighter dots on the map if you can squint and see closely enough. I will show this in a bigger picture in a moment, but it's southwest Scotland, it's parts of Wales and the southwest. So it's western areas seeing the heaviest rainfall at first this week, because at first we're seeing these systems come up from the southwest. Wednesday is very similar, another bout of wet weather for parts of Wales and the southwest, but also more widely across England, Wales, and one front becoming stalled across northern Scotland. Thursday, a bit of a gap between systems before a next band of rain pushes up from the south later in the day. And then Friday, you can see that by the bright colours there, Friday is the day we're most concerned about in terms of rainfall totals. A little bit of uncertainty at the moment because it does depend on the timing and the intensity of these weather fronts, and different computables are saying slightly different things. It's several days ahead, but certainly one to flag for the time being for particularly nasty amounts of rainfall, not only for the UK, but as you can see, for parts of Ireland as well. Let's go through the day-to-day detail. And Tuesday afternoon, we've got our first weather front moving through. What we call warm sector conditions, a warm front pushing into central Scotland, and then a cold front arriving into the west later. Across much of England and Wales, a brief gap, a lot of cloud, very mild, temperatures in the mid-teens, and also windy, particularly towards West Wales and the southwest. Those spells of rain push through overnight, but the cold front slows down and stalls across southern parts of the UK overnight, and then by Wednesday it's moving north again across much of England and Wales really through the day, so heavy rain to start things in the south and then pushing through Wales, the Midlands as the day continues. Showers for the north of Scotland, and we're starting to see blustery weather there and a change in wind direction for the north of Scotland. You can see this big contrast between southerlies in the south and northerlies across northern Scotland. Temperatures in the single figures in the north of Scotland, 15, 16 across southern parts. Thursday, a fine start to the day for many, although we do have this stalling weather front across Northern Ireland, central Scotland, northern England. That's going to peter out. Brighter skies further south, but here's the next bout of rain pushing in, and that spreads, as you can see, brighter colours on it. It starts to move in late Thursday, and then overnight, very slowly moving north across southern parts of England into the Midlands, East Anglia, parts of Wales as well. This is dawn on Friday, a soaking start to the day, and then that front really slow moving across Wales, the Midlands, East Anglia, before by the afternoon it's pushing into parts of northern England. Another bout of rain then moving into the southwest as well as Wales, and the winds all the time strengthening. We've got these colours here indicating wind gusts of 50, 60 miles an hour across North Wales, West Wales, for example, western parts of the Pennines. So the wind bouncing over those hills as it comes in from the east and could cause some issues as it peps up across parts of West Wales, in particular North Wales as well, combined with lashings of rainfall. Friday evening, as you can see, really quite wet across the Republic of Ireland into Northern Ireland, much of England and Wales. Scotland, meanwhile, into the cold air. These showers falling as sleet and snow, perhaps to lower levels across Shetland, 200 to 400 metres over the hills of northern Scotland. And then it takes a while for that front as we head into the weekend to weaken. So it's a wet start for this broad central swathe of the UK. The winds only slowly moderating as well. Very unsettled start to the weekend for some, before eventually it turns a little quieter as the high pressure to the north starts to build further south. And I want to focus on these two episodes of rain now, the one to start the week and then the one that we're going to see on Friday. So, the one to start the week, here is how Tuesday looks. We're already most of the way through Tuesday, but just because the rain is going to continue into the evening, here are the rain totals. And the brighter colours indicate where we're likely to see 50 millimetres of rain. So it's parts of southwest Scotland, particularly over the hills, South Wales, Dartmoor as well. Some significant rain totals, 60 to 80 millimetres possible through Tuesday. East Anglia, the southeast, northern Scotland, not much rain at all. But it's, western hills in particular. And that explains why we've got these warnings across many parts of the UK. And then into Wednesday, we've got this warning here. I'll rewind a little bit. There we go. We've got the southwest warning to start things off, South Wales as well. And Wednesday's rain totals, another 20, 30, perhaps more millimetres of rain over the hills of South Wales and southwest England, coming on top of Tuesday's wet weather, of course, and the wet weather that we've seen often through November so far could cause further issues. So western hills to start the week. Then we've got this gap into Thursday. Thursday starts off dry, but the next system pushes some heavy rain into the south by the end of the day, and these are the 24-hour totals on Thursday. So many places seeing a dry 24 hours. Like I said, gap between systems, but we've got the lingering rain across central Scotland, southern Scotland, northern England, parts of Northern Ireland, then this next system pushing into the south. And by Friday, take a look at this. Some really quite substantial rainfall totals likely Thursday night into Friday and continuing into the start of Saturday because of a slow-moving weather front that moves up from the south, becomes really quite intense because of that temperature contrast between Scotland and the rest of the UK, where it's much milder, and because of low pressure to the southwest and an active jet stream. All of those factors coming together to lead to a slow-moving weather front with strong easterly winds leading to the highest rainfall totals ending up over eastern parts of Wales, eastern hills of the southwest of England, parts of the Midlands, the Pennines as well. And if we cross-reference this map with the key, you'll see that quite a few areas across parts of England and Wales, more than 50 millimetres of rainfall through the 24-hour period of Friday, but add on Thursday night's rain, Saturday morning's rain as well, and there's a bit more. But the greatest concern, in the UK at least, is southeast Wales, where, as you can see, there's the risk of 70 to 120 millimetres of rain through that period, Thursday night to Saturday morning. Coming on top of the rain that we're seeing over the next 2 days could cause some significant impacts. And it's east-facing hills in southeast Wales, so places that aren't typically as wet as further west. That's Wales. You can see there the very high rainfall totals that are possible across eastern parts of the Republic of Ireland as well, just to the south of Dublin. So, likely to be issues for the Republic of Ireland, as well as parts of the UK. Parts of the UK where we don't see quite as much rain as, say, northern Scotland, which is comparatively dry over the next few days. So just to emphasise, Friday's rain, quite concerning. Stay tuned for further updates over the next couple of days. Let's move on to temperatures though, because we are going to see a drop in temperatures initially across Scotland and then that colder air eventually reaching other parts of the UK. But it's the wind that is the key feature explaining why these temperatures drop. Initially we've got southerly winds, very mild air across the whole of the UK. Then through Thursday you can see the northerly winds arriving in Scotland and the southerly winds continuing in the south. By Friday, easterly winds, as you can see, potential for impacts from that strong easterly wind, particularly for parts of the Pennines, west of the Pennines, Lake District, North and West Wales, Irish Sea coasts. But at this stage, we've got northeasterly winds starting to spread further south. Higher pressure building in for this weekend. That eventually, that higher pressure as it builds in from the north, weakens the front. Eventually, the rain fizzles away. It's going to take much of the weekend for that rain to completely disappear. There'll continue to be showers in the south, but eventually, much of the UK ends up drier than the next few days. Low pressure starts to fill towards the southwest and move a little further away. High pressure starts to build in to the north. At first, the cold air, as I say, into Thursday is across Scotland, but nowhere else really. This shows the height of the freezing level above sea level. Where we've got the greens, that effectively means the freezing level is above all mountains in the UK. So you're not going to get any snowfall. No surprise really, given how mild it's going to be over the next few days across England, Wales, Northern Ireland. But you can see there, the central belt northwards into that colder air. We've got the blues. The blues indicate a freezing level of 400 to 600 metres typically. And as meteorologists, we often subtract about 200 metres to determine the height in which precipitation will be falling as snow. Now for somewhere like Shetland, that could be happening down to sea level. So sleet, snow showers down to sea level for Shetland on Thursday, Friday. For the rest of Scotland, more likely 200 to 400 metres, so relatively modest hills, sleet and snow showers. But the showers not particularly heavy or prolonged, so I think disruptive snow fairly unlikely. It will tend to ease as well as we go into the weekend and that high pressure moves in. The showers tend to die away. But what will be more noticeable is the downward trend in temperatures. There's some uncertainty about the temperature change through the weekend and into the start of next week. Two aspects of the uncertainty: the speed at which the cold air spreads across the UK and how cold it will be in the south and southwest. I covered some of these aspects of uncertainty in the week ahead forecast on Monday. It's not quite as uncertain now, but there's still some uncertainty. By the start of next week, it looks most likely that colder air will be across the whole of the UK. And if I just show you this, I'll fast forward to Monday morning, for example. This shows the temperatures for Monday morning as we're waking up from one simulation of the European model. This is the control run. And it shows temperatures fairly widely in the low single figures, perhaps below freezing in some spots. So a chilly start for many. But we've got another 50 model runs from the European model. And if we just click on a few of these, you can see some differences in the temperature, particularly when you're looking at southern parts of the UK. They're not all that cold. 37, for example, shows temperatures of 10 to 12 Celsius. So what's happening through the weekend is that we've got the colder air trying to come in from the north and northeast, but we've still got low pressure, we've still got weather fronts close to the south and southwest, and there's always the possibility of some lingering cloud and rain in the far south and southwest. To visualise that in a slightly different way, we can show what is known as percentiles. So this is where we take all 50 ensemble members, all 50 simulations, and we take the coldest 5% and see what it comes out with. Let's call the 5th percentile. So this is the coldest 5%. So if the coldest 5% of those computer models were correct, we'd be looking at temperatures fairly widely down to frost levels Monday morning. Chilly start for many of us, and not much warmer in fact. If we go to the afternoon, 3 o'clock, below average temperatures for the time of year, low single figures for any weather. That's 5th percentile. Now the 50th percentile would be what's also known as the median, so the middle of all the computer model simulations, the middle value. And again, that's showing reasonably chilly, certainly colder than this week across the south, 6, 7, 2 or 3 across Scotland. But we've also got the 95th percentile. So if you take the warmest 5% of models, it's got the double figures in the south, but actually none of the UK, or at least none of the south, is as warm as it's going to be over the next few days. So high confidence for it turning colder. How cold in the south and southwest? That's the tricky aspect. Another way of showing that is to plot all of those temperature trends on one graph for the next 10 days. And we can see what that looks like for different parts of the country. This is the temperature trend from 50 computer model simulations, or 51 from the European model. And what we've got here, we've got somewhere across the south of England, and it shows a few things of interest. Next few days, those temperatures remain remarkably high. By day and by night, very little difference, 13, 14 Celsius, both by day and by night. Then we've got a lot of range in these temperature projections through the weekend, but if you can basically take the signal rather than the noise, it looks like there's a downward trend into the start of next week. Much more of a day-night difference, but we've got this signal for it all turning colder. And even the mildest runs, there are still some mild runs, they're colder than what we've currently got over the next few days. So that's the south, but it takes all weekend to get that colder signal for next week. If we go to the north, say northern Scotland, you can see it's Thursday. Thursday, strong signal for it to turn colder, and then we're into low single figures by day, below freezing by night. Again, a bit more messy there as we get to the middle part of next week, but virtually all the computer model simulations have it colder than the next few days. So strong signal for it to turn less mild, but how cold is currently a little uncertain into next week. And there's two potential scenarios for next week that are highlighted by this. We've shown this before. This is the most likely weather patterns. Let's put this on. These are the most likely weather patterns for the next couple of weeks, indicated by various colours here. And you can see a strong signal each day throughout next week for this one, high pressure to the north. There are different flavours of high pressure to the north. High pressure to the north, in other words, a negative North Atlantic Oscillation, typically leads to colder weather at this time of year. And the map here shows that if we select, say, Sunday's most likely weather pattern, it's got northerly winds. But going into next week, whilst that remains the most likely weather pattern, there are some less likely weather patterns, for example, high pressure over the UK, or, for example, more of a low pressure there over Scandinavia, and bringing some more unsettled weather in. But essentially we've got that signal, the high pressure to the north signal, throughout much of next week. Before these blues start to become apparent, that's where we've got a greater chance of lower pressure starting to return. And the most likely scenario for that is southwesterlies. So reasonably strong signals for the bigger picture, but I think the key uncertainty there through next week is how much the south and southwest keep something a little milder and a little wetter at times. Now with those northerlies, they're most likely to affect northern and eastern parts of the UK throughout much of next week, and there's likely to be some showers, and those showers may well fall as sleet or snow, but mostly it would be hills, and there's no strong signal for significant disruptive snow of any sort. Even if we keep some rain to the south, it currently looks like that would be in the milder air rather than in the colder air. So yeah, still some uncertainty for next week, but the general trends look to be there for it to turn less mild. Some might call it colder, but nothing particularly exceptionally unusual for the end of November. And it all ties in with the kinds of weather patterns that we've currently got all around the world, which is, well, in my opinion, very interesting. Hope you've enjoyed this week's deep dive, but do let me know if there's any comments, any questions that you might have And yeah, you'll have a chance to ask us live if you tune into the Weather Studio Live this Friday at 12:15, but otherwise I'll try and answer as many comments as I can online later on. Hit subscribe if you haven't already, keep following us, and yeah, bye-bye for now.